Hello and welcome to Thursday in Parliament. The main news from Westminster. Council tax bills are to go up in order to boost funding for social care. Opposition MPs say the measure will penalise disadvantaged areas.
This is an unfair way to raise additional money, which will increase inequalities between rich and poor areas.
The former Labour Cabinet Minister Peter Mandelson weighs into the arguments about Brexit, warning of a severe deterioration in the UK's business environment.
It will be a gradual, inexorable worsening of the conditions for business in the UK.
And hats off to Peter Bone for getting round the rules on wearing headgear in Parliament.
Would the Minister be able to say how those charities could be further supported?
I've indulged the honourable gentleman for the duration of his question, but I'm glad that he's now taken that hat off.
But first, the local government secretary Sajid Javid has announced measures to boost social care funding in England by £900 million over the next 2 years. It follows weeks of pressure on ministers over the need for extra cash. So there's a pot of cash funded from savings elsewhere of £240 million. But the main change is that local authorities will now be allowed to increase council tax by up to 6% over 2 years instead of 3.
I'm sure that all members on both sides of this House agree on the need for action to meet the growing cost of caring for some of our most vulnerable citizens. Every year, councils spend more than £14 billion on adult social care. It is by far the biggest cost pressure facing local government. The spending review put in place up to £3.5 billion of additional funding for adult social care by 2019-20, allowing local government to increase their spending on this service in real terms by the end of this Parliament. But more needs to be done. Over recent months, we have listened to, heard and understood calls from across the board saying funding is needed sooner in order to meet short-term pressures. So today I can confirm that savings from the reforms to the new homes bonus will be retained in full by local government to contribute towards adult social care costs. I can tell the House that we will use these funds to provide a new dedicated £240 million adult social care support grant in 2017-18 to be distributed fairly according to relative need.
Last year, the government announced that councils would fund social care via a new social care precept of 2% a year.
In recognition of the immediate challenges that are faced in the care market, we will now allow local councils to raise this funding sooner if they wish. Councils will be granted the flexibility to raise the precept by up to 3% next year and the year after. This will provide a further £208 million to spend on adult social care in 2017-18 and £444 million in 2018-19. These measures, together with the changes we've made to the new homes bonus, will make almost £900 million of additional funding for adult social care available over the next 2 years.
Labour said there was a postcode lottery for social care.
In the most deprived areas of the country, social care spending fell by £65 per person, but rose by £28 per person in the least deprived areas. And won't he accept that the social care precept rising will only further entrench this inequality? I ask gently of the Secretary of State, is this really the best time to be choosing to cut corporation tax on Amazon, Sports Direct and the big banks? Since the Prime Minister came to office, there has been much talk of help for those who are only just about managing their finances. That seems to have gone out of the window today.
This is surely a truly feeble response to a national crisis, and the LGA would be entitled to reject this proposal and put the ball firmly back in the government's court to think again. This is an unfair way to raise additional money, which will increase inequalities between rich and poor areas. When will the government come forward with plans to work genuinely across parties. There have been 2 suggestions already in this question and answer session. The Secretary of State hasn't answered either question. When will he work with others to come up with a genuine solution for what is now a real national crisis?
The honourable gentleman will know, first of all, where any funding that is provided to a local authority is either raised through taxes locally or it's raised through taxes nationally when it comes to funding through grants. He used the words unfair for this funding, but I mean, he should be aware, because I know he's experienced in this area, he should be aware that when we allocate the funding, the billions of funding from the Better Care Fund, it is allocated taking into account the council tax raising power of each area. That's the basis that's used for that, and that is, I think, the fairest way to do that.
In his constituency of Bromsgrove, the older adult weekly rate in social care homes is £100 less than in the Secretary of State for Health's constituency in Surrey. So, does the Secretary of State stand here in front of me and tell me that it is okay that his constituents already get £100 a week less than those of his front bench colleagues who live in leafier areas still?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, first of all, the honourable lady, in referring to her local area, Birmingham, rightly so, she mentioned my constituency of Bromsgrove, which is next door. And I think she was trying to somehow demonstrate that Bromsgrove gets more per head on average. No, Bromsgrove, well, I'm comparing Bromsgrove to Birmingham, and it gets, on average, a lot less than Birmingham per head. And I can assure her that is something that is noticed locally.
Sajid Javid there. Now, the former Labour Cabinet Minister Lord Mandelson has told MPs that Brexit represents the same danger to the British economy as the global financial crisis of 2008-09. Lord Mandelson, who campaigned for Remain during the referendum, was giving evidence to the Business Committee about the government's industrial strategy.
You are risking a very severe deterioration in the UK business environment. Now, this deterioration is not going to happen straight away. That was the mistaken impression, in my view, given in the referendum. It will be a gradual, inexorable worsening of the conditions for business in the UK. That's why those who say, well, it all seems to be going, okay so far, are completely missing the point. It hasn't even kicked off yet.
Could I suggest to you that you might feel that your project would be complete when the government learns to love and understand a modern industrial strategy? Good adaptation of the well-known quote. My view, as I said at the beginning, is that Britain is facing a massive economic challenge with Brexit. Let's not revisit the referendum. It's had a result, and now we have to get on with it and making sure that it has the least negative impact on the UK economy.
You would be well aware, I'm sure, that Sir Ivan Rogers, the British ambassador to the EU, in a leaked memo today has been revealed as saying that a trade deal will take 10 years to negotiate after Brexit. Can I ask what your gut reaction to that kind of revelation is?
Lord Mandelson said that sort of timetable was realistic if the government wanted a bespoke trade deal with the EU.
I mean, while an agreement on the exit terms will come earlier, because this negotiation will come first and can be approved by a majority of the EU's member states, the quite separate negotiation on what trade arrangement replaces our membership of the EU will be harder, it will be longer, and it will require the approval of all member states and their parliaments, not just a majority of them. If we get Brexit wrong, industrial strategy will not be big enough or strong enough to correct its consequences. I've absolutely no doubt at all about that if we get Brexit wrong. But please, I do underline that it is possible to get, in my view, Brexit right.
It's been an aspiration of successive governments and successive ministers to try and get a joined-up approach in Whitehall. Why is it so difficult? And if this industrial strategy is going to succeed, what needs to happen in terms of cooperation and collaboration across the departments?
Because heads of departments, secretaries of state, become very possessive, very protective of their policies and their resources. And oftentimes, if they have to share them, they think either that they're going to be less well executed or that they as individuals are going to get less of the credit. It's politics. Now, welcome to the world of Westminster.
What's the timescale to evaluate the success of a proper industrial strategy? How will we know that Theresa May has carried that out? And in the meantime, what are the things that we can be looking at, the metrics, to see whether that's coming off the rails or not?
We can judge it by, in a sense, the story it tells now and the narrative it offers, and whether it sort of makes sense. We can judge it too by the policy instruments and levers that are being harnessed to it and the sorts of decisions and judgments that are being taken in the use of those policy instruments. But finally, how will we be able to judge eventually what is being done now? I would say a good 10 years' time, the same length of time, coincidentally, as I suspect it will take to negotiate an alternative free trade agreement between Britain and the European Union to replace our existing membership of the EU.
We heard Lord Mandelson being asked there about remarks made by Sir Ivan Rogers, the UK's ambassador to the EU. He's reported as saying that the European consensus is that a Brexit deal might not be reached until the early to mid-2020s. Sir Ivan's remarks were also raised with ministers.
We are told that it could take up to 10 years to reach a trade agreement with the EU after we leave, while research from NISA suggests a drop in trade of up to 60% if we're outside the customs union. Foreign investors are vital to the British economy, so will he give those investors some of the certainty they so desperately need and that we also need as well? Will he tell them whether he wants Britain to be inside the customs union and whether he wants tariff-free access to the single market or not?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it has been very, very clear that the government is not going to give a running commentary on what we're proposing to do. And I would also stress, Mr. Speaker, that the comments of Ivan Rogers are the opinions from taking words from interlocutors. And this does not necessarily define how long it will take to create a trade deal. It's worth bearing in mind that if you look at some trade deals around the world, whilst TPP has taken potentially 8 years, it's worth bearing in mind that the US-Jordan trade deal took just 4 months. So it is very, very difficult to be able to establish exactly how long any trade deal will take.
Shouldn't we be thanking our ambassador to the European Union for the reality check that he's given about the decade-long period of time it will take to extricate ourselves from this particular process? Shouldn't we be not rushing so headlong into this timetable?
Mr. Speaker, yes, there are a number of bureaucratic challenges that we face, but the people that we should be thanking are the British people for giving us such clear instructions to leave the European Union.
Questioning then turned to the controversial subject of British arms sales to Saudi Arabia, although the tie being worn by the Labour spokesman appeared to be of more interest to some.
Love the tie. Of the steps the government is taking to expand UK trade is through arms sales, particularly to the Middle East. In July, the Committee on Arms Export Control heard evidence that there was an imbalance between promotion of arms sales at the expense of the regulation of arms sales. And I quote, such that in UK practice, these things are at odds. Does the Secretary of State recognise that imbalance? If he does, what does he propose to do about it? And if he does not, What representations has he made to the White House to chastise them for their remarks this week that, and I quote, "the systemic endemic problems in Saudi Arabia's targeting of civilians in Yemen drove the US decision to halt a future weapons sale, which has left the Secretary of State and British policy in this area looking so callous and so threadbare"?
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all thank the honourable gentleman. It's the first time in my life I've been grateful for being colourblind. This country has one of the strictest arms control regimes in the world. It is both robust and transparent, and the decisions are looked at with very, very great scrutiny, and I simply don't accept the picture that he paints of the UK's attitude.
Well, I'm going to play the role of the tie referee and say that I believe that the honourable gentleman's tie is absolutely beautiful. It is tasteful and interesting, not boring like all too many ties.
By insulting my wife's taste in ties, the Secretary of State must await her reprimand. But she must wait in line because there are others who wish to reprimand him. The European Scrutiny Committee told off the Secretary of State for going to Brussels and agreeing the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement between the EU and Canada without first bringing it to the UK Parliament for scrutiny. He undertook to the Scrutiny Committee that he would bring CETA for debate in this House by the end of November, a deadline which he missed. The European Scrutiny Committee actually set a more generous deadline. But, Mr. Speaker, that deadline expired 2 days ago on the 13th of this month. So can he tell us, does he actually believe in taking back sovereignty from Brussels, or doesn't he? Because if he does, repeatedly denying the UK Parliament the right to properly scrutinise such an important trade agreement is a very odd way of going about it. Will he now commit to bring a debate and a vote to the floor of this House before the European Parliament finally votes on CETA on the 2nd of February?
I gently say to the honourable gentleman, the member for Brent North, whom I hold in the highest esteem, that I hope in due course his PhD thesis will be published. Secretary of State.
Without the time.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way before Christmas. We did not go against procedure. Due to parliamentary timetable constraints, we could not offer a debate in the House before signalling political agreement on the 18th of October. We have committed and continue to commit to holding a full parliamentary debate on CETA as soon as possible, and we're working with business managers to arrange this. The European Parliament has now changed the date of the expected vote on the agreement to the 2nd of February 2017, and we hope to have a debate well within that timetable.
You're watching Thursday in Parliament with me, Christina Cooper. Ministers have been discussing the child sex abuse scandal in football with the police, sports bodies and the NSPCC. The Culture Secretary Karen Bradley told MPs it was crucial to give the police time to investigate all the allegations fully.
The Government takes these matters very seriously. Yesterday I co-chaired a meeting with my right honourable friend the Home Secretary, with sports bodies, law enforcement and the NSPCC to ensure that sports are able to deal effectively with allegations of both non-recent abuse and that they have the most robust possible child protection processes in place today.
Henry Bellingham.
Mr. Speaker, does the Secretary of State agree with me that whilst the allegations currently under investigation, which involve over 100 clubs, are truly shocking, does she agree that the vast majority of coaches and volunteers in local sports clubs play a crucial role in our constituencies? Does she also agree that it's vital that we don't put off or discourage potential volunteers who would never dream of betraying the trust that's placed on them?
Hear, hear.
I agree with my honourable friend. We want to make sure that parents and young people have the confidence to participate in sport. We need to know what happened. We need to make sure that victims come forward and the police have the time to carry out investigations, and that there is confidence in the system. The roundtable I co-chaired yesterday was incredibly helpful in flushing out where we can do more, because we can always do more, but also to give reassurance that so much is being done.
Betts.
I'm sure we're all appalled by the allegations of the horrific abuse that have come out, which have besmirched the game that many of us love so much in recent weeks. Now, we're aware of the helpline that's available for people to phone up and relate what happened to them. Has the Secretary of State had conversations now with the football authorities about what more could be done proactively to actually identify those people who were involved with the abusers in the past, had contact with them, and actually assist them in every way to come forward with a very difficult decision to relate what happened to them?
I can confirm I've had exactly those conversations with the FA, the Premier League, the English Football League and the PFA to make sure that we are identifying those people who may have been victims and have not yet had the confidence to come forward.
My contempt in these matters is reserved almost solely for the predators and abusers who carried out these crimes rather than the institutions. But the Secretary of State is right. There has to be a reflection on what went wrong and how we can maximise the robustness of safeguarding. Can she tell the House which individual sporting bodies she has met recently to have these discussions?
With not wishing to detain the House with the long list, perhaps it would be helpful if I was to write to the honourable gentleman with the full list of the bodies that both myself and my honourable friend the Sports Minister have spoken to.
Mr Dennis Skinner. Isn't it remarkable that the people that are making statements are those that went to football clubs amongst the 92 teams in the football leagues of Britain? However, most people like me working at the pit used to be coached at the miners' welfare. Nobody's been brought forward that was helping at the miners' welfares all over Britain, where there were 700 of them. The truth is, it's about the money as well. And so when you're digging into this, remember there is a class argument about it. It's about the people making money, and the Tories know a lot about that.
I'm sorry, Mr Speaker, I don't think trying to bring party politics into this matter is at all appropriate. This is a matter of vulnerable young people who have been abused by predatory individuals in all walks of life, and I think it belittles this House to even suggest that there is party politics involved.
The Sports Secretary, Karen Bradley. Now, the government's toughened up the penalties for using a mobile phone while driving. Under new rules expected to come in next year, drivers will get 6 points on their licence and face a £200 fine. Ministers are also looking at introducing life sentences for drivers convicted of causing death through dangerous or careless driving. Labour's Lord Campbell-Savers has been conducting his own investigation into drivers using mobile phones.
Recently, I was standing on a corner awaiting some lights to change near Maidenhead, and in the phasing of the lighting, discounting one or two of the first vehicles that went through, out of 37 vehicles that passed me, 11 were using mobile phones. And I believe what I saw is an indicator of a national problem where the estimates are grossly underestimated.
There is clear support for the proposed change in the law to increase fixed penalty notice from £100 to £200 and to double points added to a licence from 3 to 6. This means that novice drivers would automatically have their licences revoked, which should hopefully act as a strong deterrent. I also welcome new laws that will see drivers who kill other road users because of mobile phone distraction being given life sentences. Penalties, bans and prison sentences are all well and good, but to my mind, this is too late. We need to stop these incidents happening in the first place.
But there was some opposition to the new offences.
You don't want to create specific offences of a different sort. The existing offences are totally adequate for the purpose of dealing with those who drive dangerously. And I would say the penalties that are now in those offences are sufficient to act as a deterrent.
And finally, from colourful ties to crazy hats, there's definitely an end-of-term mood in the House of Commons. The Conservative Peter Bone donned a hat in honour of a breast cancer charity in his constituency.
Tomorrow is Local Charities Day, and we will also have very good local charities in our constituencies. One of mine is Crazy Hats. It's run by Glenys Hooper and a group of dedicated volunteers. They've raised over £2 million, sir, by people wearing crazy hats. And they spent that money on breast cancer in Northamptonshire. Would the Minister be able to say how those charities could be further supported?
I've indulged the honourable gentleman for the duration of his question, but I'm glad that he's now taken that hat off, and I sincerely hope he won't put it on again, preferably at any time, but certainly not in the chamber. The Leader of the House.
I thought for one moment, Mr. Speaker, that my honourable friend was auditioning for a role in some remake of the film Elf.
Festive or not, the Speaker was reminding everyone that wearing hats in the Commons is out of order. That's it from me for now, but do join me on Friday night at 11 for a roundup of the week here in Westminster. But for now, from me, Christina Cooper, goodbye.